All right, so I'm going to go through the PowerPoint on counter argument. It is a very detailed PowerPoint. I'm going to talk about it in overview, so I'm going to do it a little bit more quickly. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you because it does have a lot of text explanation that speaks for itself. I just want to hit a few of the key highlights and work through it that way. So hopefully this is a useful supplement to the counter argument PowerPoint. It is not a replacement of looking at the counter argument PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share screen here. Okay. Here we go. All right. Counter argument. So why use it? You have to be aware in your writing that people are going to disagree with you. If nobody disagrees with you, you have no argument. You don't have a useful topic. So where that might happen, particularly for essay 3 in our class, is maybe they disagree on the causes. Maybe they disagree on the urgency of it. Okay, they agree that it's a problem. They agree that your causes that you're listing are the right causes, but they don't think it really matters. And you've got to address that perhaps. So they're sitting back saying, yeah, but I don't think it's really important. And you're going to say, okay, let me counter that argument that you're making. You say it's not important. I say it is. I'm going to counter that argument. Or they say, it's not nearly as damaging as you think. And you're like, okay, well, actually, it is as damaging as I'm claiming. And here's why. Right. So you're saying you have this position and you're against me. Here's what I've got to say to offer a counter to that. Okay. All right. One of the things that you do as a useful exercise, I'm going to read through this. It encourages you to think about the readers who may be questioning you, right? How might they be questioning your position? That allows you to look for weaknesses. If you think of it in sort of a sports analogy, there are teams out there, they don't just prepare their offense and their defense for that game. They also think about what are the strengths and weaknesses of my opposition. Where might they exploit my weaknesses? My defense is a little bit slow, and so I've got to be careful of that. So I'm anticipating how they might come at me. Okay. By addressing readers' concerns, right? As it says here, their inherent skepticism or doubt, it allows you to say your argument a little bit more aggressively, a little bit more assertively, confidently. And it also allows you to anticipate those possible concerns so that you can address them before your argument gets derailed. Okay. All right. So it helps you as a writer, making sure that you present a clear, truthful argument and you're not just sort of focused on winning, right? If you're being honest with yourself, you know that your argument has some weaknesses. As a result of that, by thinking through what those weaknesses are, you can either minimize them or shore them up and make them stronger. Okay, so they're no longer weaknesses. Okay. Are all of counter arguments useful? No. Sometimes you just don't need them. I don't want you to get too caught up in using them in your essay. It shouldn't be where your essay is primarily about, arguing against somebody else. At some point, you want to be arguing for your position. But considering others' views is useful, and making sure that you're aware of how you are being perceived by your audience is also incredibly positive. Okay. So 2 levels or stages. Okay. So part 1, you are going to be in the first part of your counter argument, you offer up those who disagree with you. You give them space to speak in your essay and offer their position. But that's just the beginning. You're being fair, but you are not trying to manipulate. You are not trying to reject yet. You're simply saying, some argue instead this. Okay. And then you go into some detail. Ideally, you want to quote. Okay. You got to find opposition. You cannot make it up. You can't manufacture it out of thin air. You've got to find people who disagree with you. You may come across those concerns or those disagreements in your research. You incorporate them into your counter argument paragraph or paragraphs. You can have a few. Okay. So again, the first part is simply saying, here's their position. This is similar to what we did for essay 2, where the first part of every body paragraph was supposed to be an explanation of the facts, right? What are they thinking? Okay. You must find a skeptical reader or source who might counter your original argument by pointing out one of the following concerns, questions, or doubts. Okay. They might have a problem with the development of your original argument. Maybe they just disagree when you say this is a real primary cause, and they're like, nah, no, it's not. And so they're not going to take your word for it. Okay. And maybe when you are offering that up, you didn't necessarily say it as strong as you could, or you didn't have quite as good evidence as you should have. Okay. Maybe you left something out. Maybe you know that if you leave this piece of the argument out, you're going to have a better argument, but that's a failure of omission, right? You're being dishonest by not fully sharing everything. And again, there's some examples in here. The other is maybe there are some realistic concerns or drawbacks to your argument. Maybe your sense of urgency is going to ask me to prioritize something that I don't want to prioritize right now that I think is more important than what you are pushing. And so that's something that we would want to possibly address. Okay. And then obviously the most classic one is a position that's different than your own that could make more sense. Maybe somebody is saying that's not the real cause. This one is instead. And maybe that makes really good sense. And you've got to address it by either adopting that position as part of your own or proving to me that that actually doesn't make as much sense as they think. It's not as strong of an argument against yours as they might think. Okay. Part two, that second stage, right? This is where you now shift to your rebuttal, right? Where you basically say, you were arguing this, but however, nonetheless, in contrast, right? On the other hand, right? There's a lot of different ways to phrase that. You then give your reasoning that rejects or defeats, as the word I use here, the presented counter argument. You basically say, you think you're right, you're not. Okay. And you go into some detail, right? You can show why it's flawed in its reasoning. Maybe it's about logic, all right? Maybe it's factually inaccurate, okay? Here it says, note the argument's general validity, but then show why it is less important. So you can say maybe, yeah, that is a cause, but it's not a main cause. My three are the main causes. Yours is kind of a side note. Sure, that contributes, but very little, so it's not really my concern, right? That might be a useful way to approach it. Okay. Where do we put it? It can go pretty much anywhere. More often than not, though, students provide it earlier in their essays rather than later. You know, a lot of high school students were told to put counter argument as like the last body paragraph of the essay. And the problem with that is, what if your reader has been thinking about that counter argument point for your entire essay and you haven't addressed it, right? It's better to get that counter argument rebuttal that, hey, you might be thinking this, but you're wrong, or you may be thinking this, but you're exaggerating it, or you may not think this, but you're, uninformed or misinformed. You want to take care of that kind of counter argument earlier in your essay so that if they did have that skepticism, if they did have that doubt, they can get that out of the way. That clears the decks for them to now be more receptive to your argument for the rest of the essay. Okay. And as I said before, don't overuse them. If you use them too much, if your essay basically becomes a whole bunch of rejections, you're sort of the party of no rather than the party of yes. You want to be the party of your ideas, your argument, your position. This is what you're pushing, not simply you spend your entire essay rejecting somebody else's ideas. Okay. That's not terribly interesting. It's also not terribly effective. You are arguing against somebody else very effectively, but you're not arguing for your position very well. Okay. You can do this through pre-writing and revising. Most students throw something out in their pre-writing and their early drafting. And then as part of the revision, they kind of come through their drafting process and realize, oh, actually, there is this other cause that I didn't really address, but I don't want to, but I know it's out there. I'm going to add that in. I didn't think I was going to, but now that I've kind of gotten to that revision stage of my essay, I think I need to put that back in there. And so they take care of it that way. Okay. All right. Ultimately, the purpose of your position paper, this problem argument that you're making, is to argue your position, but to ignore that people disagree with you, right? That they have opposing viewpoints is myopic, right? Very narrow minded, narrow focused. And it results in kind of a mediocre final essay because, if we're being honest, at that point, I'm probably aware of the counter arguments you're ignoring. I'm aware of the counter arguments you're not addressing. And if I know of them, if they're fairly obvious ones that I know that you should have addressed at least one or two of them, your essay is now coming up short. It's missing some pieces, and that is a problem. So we don't want to do that. All right. So I'm hoping this has been helpful. If you have any questions as you're putting together your counter argument, if you're not sure if it works as counter argument, you know that you can talk to me either in class or you can email me, find me in office hours on Zoom, whatever. Reach out, right? Let me help you. I can't do that if you don't reach out. All right. Take care.